英語会話
Hello everyone, welcome to our English conversation program. I'm Katsuaki Togo presenting the coffee break. Here with me are
Sue Wanwade
and Michael Barkley.
Let's have fun talking over a cup of coffee.
Welcome back to the coffee break. You two, Sue and Michael. And to begin with, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay, this is Sue Wanwade back again for our Saturday visits. I'll be trying to bring an American's point of view to our coffee break, although I can't speak for all Americans. But anyway, I'm very glad to be back.
And I'm Michael Barkley, and I'm from England, so I'll chat about a few things that are different in England. I hope you enjoy our conversations.
皆さん、こんにちは。お元気でいらっしゃいますか？今年も土曜日にはコフィーブレイクというタイトルで、簡単な、会話ですね。自由会話をお届けします。で、お相手は今ご紹介いただきましたスー・ワンウィークさんとマイケル・バークレーさんに引き続きお願いすることになりました。Okay, since the subject for today's discussion is names, may I suggest beginning by talking about our names?
Okay, that sounds like a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Is your name common in America, Sue?
If you're asking about my first name, it's very, very common, but my family name is not common at all.
Does it have any meaning?
Yes, it's a Norwegian name, actually, although it's an American name now, but originally Norwegian. Wan means water, and wig means inlet, so
Really?
maybe something like water inlet. Actually, it should be pronounced more like Van Veek, but when my grandparents came to the United States, they realized no one would ever be able to get that out of the spelling, so they anglicized it. It's not a very common name in Norway either, apparently, and it's become rather traditional in our family to have kind of simple and common first name simply because the last name is so unusual. Although my brother is going ethnic with his children, Bjorn and Eric, very Scandinavian
Back
sounding.
to the roots.
What about your name?
Well, Mike or Michael is very common, I think, in England, but my family name, Barkley, is not so common. It probably came from a place name in France. It's a very old name in England now, but I don't think it has a meaning as such.
But you know, Michael, there is a large bank with the same name in England, isn't there?
It sounds
Barkley.
the same. That's right, it sounds the same, but in fact the spelling is different. My name is spelled like the university. You may know the university in California.
Uh-huh.
But although in America they pronounce it Berkeley, in England we say Barkley.
Barkley. Uh-huh.
Right.
Well, sounds like it's my turn to tell something about my name, and I would say both my first and family names are very unusual. My family name is particularly unusual, so if you happen to meet anyone with the same name as mine, he might be a distant relative.
Oh, really?
And just one other thing, we usually don't have a middle name, while you mostly seem to have one. Can you tell us why, sir?
I think there may be different reasons in the different European countries, but one reason is that historically, when people were converted to Christianity or were baptized, they were given an extra name, usually something biblical. This also was important because hundreds of years ago, not everyone had a last name or family name. So having the two names prevented difficulties in identification. Nowadays, it's also a way of keeping family names within the family. For example, if a woman gets married and would like to keep her maiden name in the family, she may use that last name as a middle name for one of the children. Some people may actually have several middle names for that reason. Is it the same in England?
Yes, I think one of the major reasons for having a middle name is simply for identification purposes. A lot of names came from a person's occupation, for example, baker, butcher, smith, even Thatcher. And then if you had a common first name like John, then perhaps John Baker would not be very distinguishable from the John Baker in the next village. So we'd have a middle name to make identification easier.
And sometimes people have the same first name as their father or mother. In our case, my father and my brother are both named John, so my brother uses his middle name, Daniel, to prevent confusion just in our house.
And we come across names which end with son or begin with O or Mac. And
That's right.
Do you have anything to comment on this?
Right. They are quite old names now, but the thing is that MacDonald, for example, would originate from the son being named after his father, who would be called Donald. So Mac means son of. And that's very common in Scotland. In Ireland, they have O apostrophe. For example, O'Brien, O'Reilly. And that again means of, so son of. And as you said, son, like Williamson, Smithson, that would be son of Smith, son of William.
Yes, the Scandinavian and German names also have that as very common endings.
That's right.
今日は names ですね、いろんな名前についてお話をしておりますけれども、最初に、スー・ワンウィッグさんのお名前、それからマイケル・バークレーさんのお名前について伺いましたが、ワンウィッグさんのお名前はノルウェーの方からその源があるということで、そしてそのワンウィッグ、それは water inlet というふうな意味だというふうにおっしゃいましたね。それからスーというファーストネームの方は非常によくどこにでもある名前ですけれども、このファミリーネームの方は非常に珍しいお名前ですね。それからマイクルさんの方もマイクルあるいはマイクという名前はよく聞かれますが、バークレー。こちらの方は、アメリカとイギリスと多少発音あるいは綴り字が違いますね。で、イギリスの場合には B-E-R-K-E-L-E-Y というふうに綴りますが、発音はバークレーですね。アメリカの場合には同じ綴り字でもベルクレーというふうに発音されますね。カリフォルニア大学のある場所の The University of California in Berkeley というふうに言いますが、その場合と綴り上同じですが発音が違いますね。そういったことをお話になりましたが、それから、ファミリーネームに関しましては、例えば、Mac が頭につきましたり、O がついたりする名前がありますけれども、O'Brien、例えばこういう言い方ですね。これは、やはり、ブライアンさんのというふうなところから来た名前です。それから、Mac、これもスコットランドに多いわけですが、誰々さんの息子というふうな意味ですね。そこで、マクドナルドと言いますと、ドナルドさんの息子という、そういうところから、ファミリーネームが出てきたわけですけれども、それから、middle name、つまり中間の名前が向こうの人の名前によくありますが、それはどういうことですかということに対しましては、だいたい3つぐらい理由が挙げられまして、1つは洗礼を受けた時にそういう名前が付けられる。それから、実際に、女性の場合結婚をしてしまった後にその姓をさらに、引き続き、名乗りたい場合ですね。それをmiddle name として、そのまま残しておく場合。それから、同じような名前の人がたくさんいる場合にやはり混同をきたしますから、そういう場合に、ミドルネームをつけて、区別をするということですね。で、特に、昔は職業の名前で名前をつけましたから、例えばジョン・ベイカーという人がいますと、隣のジョン・ベイカーさんと向かいのジョン・ベイカーさんが混同するということで、ミドルネーム、真ん中の名前を一つ加えたということですね。Okay, on what occasions do you usually use your middle names then?
Well, Sue mentioned that you might use it instead of your first name if there are 2 or 3 people with the same first name, or if you prefer it. We never use your first name and your middle name when addressing someone, when speaking to someone, but we would use it for filling in documents, for formal forms, that kind of thing. And very often we just use the initial instead of the name, like Michael F. Barkley.
I see. Then in daily conversations, when you address each other, which of the 3 names, I mean, first name, middle name, and last name, or probably I have to say which of the 4 names, because I very often people talking about Christian names at the same time. I wonder in what situations these names are actually used.
Well, it depends on the degree of formality of the situation, but by and large, Americans prefer first names in social situations. For example, meeting someone at a club or a party. Also among co-workers, we often use the first name.
Mm-hmm.
The term Christian name is not so common in America, but I believe in England it's almost interchangeable with given name or first name.
Yes, we often say Christian name or first name. Mm-hmm.
And are there any rules of thumb by which we can tell when to start using the first name of the person we have met?
Well, even among native speakers, there's some disagreement. But I think if the person is about the same age, you can go ahead and use the first name even in business, but you should expect then also to be called by your first name. Children call adults Mr. or Ms. So-and-so, and adults call much older people or people in a position of authority by their last names. I think you're safest, if you're in doubt, to wait for the other person to suggest that you use the first name. Now, I think foreigners in Japan present a confusion often because Japanese know that we often prefer to use our first names, and we know that the Japanese people like to use their last names. So sometimes in English conversation class, you might have the teacher using the first name and the students use their last name. I guess this is all right in Japan, but we should be aware that it's really backwards. And if you go to America and you use your first name, you call the other people by the first name, and you use your last name, they might be a little bit insulted. And particularly women and racial minorities are a bit sensitive to this. Anyway, don't use the first name until asked to do so if you're in doubt. Mm-hmm. In England, too?
In England, it's probably not quite as informal as in America. Certainly young people, and by that I mean anything up to middle-aged, will use their first names when they meet socially. Otherwise, business, older people, usually your family name.
Mm-hmm. それからよく問題になるわけですが、どういう時に相手のファーストネームを使っていいのかということですが、これは一番安全なのは相手の人から、Why don't you call me John であるとか、Why don't you call me Meg というふうに相手の人がこういうふうに呼んでくださいと言われてからそれを使い始めるというのが一番安全なわけですね。それから、先ほどのミドルネームですが、これは普通の会話では用いません。で、何か非常に正式な書類に書き込むときとか、そういった場合にのみ使われますね。それから、And just one other thing, some names have their short forms and they are more commonly used than their long forms, such as, say, Bill for Williams or Liz for Elizabeth, and perhaps you can tell us some more examples of this sort.
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, very common is Pete, short for Peter. Mm-hmm. That's an easy one. More difficult is Robert. That can sometimes be Bob or Rob or Bobby or Robbie. Charles is an easy one, Charlie.
Can also be Chuck.
Or Chuck in America, yes, not in England.
And what about some of the girls' names, sir?
Well, these are all Anglo-Saxon names, but Deborah is often shortened to Debbie. From Margaret, we can get anything from Marge to Maggie or Meg or Peggy. Mm-hmm. Patricia could be either Pat or Patty or Tricia. Teresa could be Terry. And sometimes people with non-Anglo-Saxon names will shorten theirs to make them easier for other people to pronounce.
Well, I'm sorry to say we seem to have a lot more to talk about, but that's all the time we have today. But fortunately, we have another session next Saturday in which we're supposed to talk about names. So let's continue our discussion next week. Okay, until then, so long.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.
担当は東後勝明先生。お相手はスー・ワンウィグさんとマイケル・バークレーさんでした。英語会話を終わります。英語会話。
Hello everyone, welcome to our English conversation program. Today being Saturday, I am delighted to be back presenting another coffee break discussion. Here with me are
Sue Wanwood
and Michael Barkley.
Let's have fun talking over a cup of coffee.
I'm very happy to be back to continue our discussion on a variety of names in English, and we talked about such things as first names or Christian names, middle names, family or surnames, and the nicknames last week. But I'm not quite sure how nicknames differ from what we call pet names. And shall we begin with this one? Tell me what you mean by nicknames, Sue.
Okay, maybe I should say first that some people don't have nicknames and don't like them, so we shouldn't automatically try to think of one for every person. But a nickname is a name that's used among friends. It's often something humorous. For example, a short person might be Shorty, or a fat person might be Fatty or Fatso. Have to be careful because that can be a little bit cruel. It's actually more likely that we would call a very tall person Shorty, or someone who's too skinny is called Fatso.
Sarcastically, you mean?
Sarcastically. And other names are plays on words. For example, there was a girl at our school whose last name was Nicholson, and her nickname was Penny. A pet name, on the other hand, is used within the family. Sometimes pet names come about when a child pronounces his own name or someone else's name in a baby-like way. As an example, when my dad became a grandfather, he also gained the pet name Bop, B-O-P, because that was how his granddaughter first tried to say grandpa, and the name just stuck. My mother told me when she was very small, she couldn't say her name, which was Lillian. The best she could do was Mia, so that stuck with her. Husbands and wives may call each other something like Sweetie Pie, or possibly something that only has a meaning to that particular couple, perhaps because of a private joke. I think usually people are a little bit embarrassed to have people outside the family learn their pet names because they tend to be either sentimental or based on some kind of family incident or joke.
Embarrassing, huh?
That's right. They're quite a personal thing, either for affection or, as Sue said, something from childhood or something like that. So it's not something outsiders should call people, really, not their pet names, I don't think, unless they're very, very close. Other kinds of nicknames, very often they're short forms of the person's name or corruption of the name. At school, nobody calls me this now, but at school a lot of people called me Barkers simply because it's short for Barkley.
Barkley,
And one of my great friends is called Braithwaite, and he's often referred to as Braces. And something like Wellington would be Welly, that kind of thing. Also another kind, I don't know if you remember the singer from the 60s whose name was Sandy Shaw. So the surname, in the case of this Shaw meaning beach, then people would call her Sandy or Chalky White, for example. So that's another kind.
And then there are the short forms like Bob for Robert. Those are sometimes also called nicknames.
今日は名前の第2回目ですが、最初にニックネームズとそれからペットネームズがどういうふうに違うのかという話を今伺いましたが、かなり早くてたくさんのことをお話になりましたから難しかったかもしれませんが、簡単に言いますと、例えばニックネームと言いますのは、愛称ですけれども、相手の体の特徴とかそういったものを使って、日本でも使いますが、やや太めの人にファティと言ってみたり、あるいは背の低い人にショーティと言ったりですね、あるいは逆にそれを背の高い人にショーティと言ってからかってみたり、あるいは痩せた人にファティというふうに言ったりするということですね。それから、ネコルソンという名前の人に、ペニーのことをネコルと言いますから、ニックネームとしてペニーというふうな名前をつけたり、あるいはホワイト、チョークからの連想で、チョーキーと言ってみたりですね。そういったものをニックネームと言いますね。それからペットネームと言いますのは、実際に家族の中で、呼び合う、独特の呼び方で何かエピソードとか、そういったものに、目指して、そこの家族内だけで使われているようなお互いの呼び方ですね。そういうものを、ペットネームというふうに言っておりますね。Alright, in connection with personal names, may I suggest discussing various titles or honorifics which are used with those names? And what are some of the most common ones, I wonder?
Well, obviously the most common, which all our listeners will know, are Mr. and Mrs. or Miss. And becoming much more common these days is Ms., just M S, full stop, for ladies, because it's not really fair that men can go around being called Mr., so nobody knows if they're married or not, but ladies could be labeled as being married or not. So that's much more common, particularly in formal situations or on written things, print or letters, what have you. I think probably when we're speaking, we don't use it very much, at least in England. What about in the States, Sue?
I think in the United States we also say Ms. quite a bit. And then there are other titles for people in particular professions. Doctor could be used either by a medical doctor or someone who's completed a PhD. That's the highest academic degree. Professor applies to a rank of college or university teachers, someone higher than just a temporary instructor, though. With religious titles, there's a whole variety, but since there are quite a few missionaries in Japan, it might be worth mentioning. In the Catholic Church, also the Episcopal Church, the priest is called Father so-and-so. The nuns are referred to as sister. Protestant ministers are usually, when we speak to them, we say pastor so-and-so, but in writing, either the priest or the minister is reverend. In the Jewish faith, the equivalent would be a rabbi. I think it's always safest to ask, though, if you're in doubt what to call the person, because in some groups they simply say elder. If in doubt, you might simply say, shall I call you Reverend so-and-so? And they will correct you if that's wrong.
Now, there seems to be another type of titles which are conferred on someone by Queen in Britain. Why don't we talk about it? What I have in mind is Sir to begin with.
Right, Sir, or for a lady, then Lady. A lot of people think that Sir John so-and-so is a hereditary title, so that he would necessarily be someone of the aristocracy. But in fact, as you say, the Queen confers the title Sir on various people, particularly for services to the country, for example, ambassadors, diplomats, services to industry, and this is usually decided by the government on recommendations from people in those industries or whatever, and it's up to the Queen to confer the knighthood. It's called a knighthood on those people.
That's something that we don't have at all in America, and it sounds a little bit strange to me, I confess. People in very prominent positions, for example, in the government, would be called maybe Madam Ambassador or Mr. President. In writing, if we want to write a letter to our congressman or something, we would write, Dear Senator so-and-so, or Dear Congresswoman so-and-so. But on the envelope, we would write the Honorable in place of the position they hold.
Yes, we have the Honourable too, particularly for members of Parliament.
And one of the things which need to be remembered here in relation to these titles is that in the case of Sir, it's always used with his first name, not his surname.
That's right.
Right?
So before the person is Mr. Bloggs, and then afterwards he's Sir John.
And in American custom, in referring to or addressing your ambassador, you simply say Mr. Ambassador, but in the British way, you have to say either ambassador followed by his surname, or if he is a Sir, then he's a Sir plus his first name.
That's right. I think I'm right in saying that in the formal situation, an ambassador is Your Excellency, but the Queen would be Your Majesty.
Your Majesty.
Various members of the royal family, Your Highness.
それから今度は、名前の前につく、つまり名前の姓名の姓の方の前につくいろんな継承とかタイトルが あるわけですけれども、その中でも、Sir の称号ですね。この場合にはその後には First Name が来ますからご注意ください。したがって Sir、その後には、マイケルであるとか、ジョンであるとか、そういう First Name が来るわけですね。それから、他のタイトルはほとんどのものが Mr. Mrs. あるいは Miss、あるいは Dr. Professor、こういったタイトルは全部その後には、ファミリーネームあるいはサーネームが来ますから、ご注意ください。それからアメリカでは、Mr. Ambassador あるいは Mr. President というふうな言い方ができますね。Okay, apart from the titles and the honorifics which we've been discussing, I'd like to turn our eyes to the names of places and their origins. And in England there are quite a few places with such names as Yorkshire or Oxfordshire, or something which ends with shire, or Muth, as in, say, Plymouth,
that's right.
And the like. And can you elaborate on those names a little bit?
Right. Well, as you say, they're tagged on to the end of a name. Shire, which is how it's pronounced if it's a word in itself, or sh, as in Yorkshire, so it means something like a county. It's a region of local office, or it used to be. For example, York City is in Yorkshire, and Oxford is in Oxfordshire. The Muth is spelt mouth, as in Bournemouth, Portsmouth, and I think it's the mouth of the river, so these are usually, always places by the sea, like Portsmouth and Bournemouth, as I say. And Ton, as in Southampton, T-O-N, presumably means town. Southampton was an old town.
Well, many of those names sound familiar to me because we often have names, towns with the same names in America, particularly in New England. All of the places with names like New York, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Bedford, they're all named after places in England. There's even a London in Ontario, Canada. There's a city in Alabama called Birmingham, and I think you have a city by the same name in England, but how do you pronounce it?
Yes, it's a little different. Birmingham.
それから、地名の中で特にイギリスの場合には最後が HIRE ですね。その言葉だけ発音しますと、シャイアと言いますが、例えばヨークシャーというふうに発音しますね。それは、カウンティの語尾ですけれども、もともとはオフィスとかオーソリティというふうな意味があったわけですが、そういう発音で終わる地名がたくさんありますね。カウンティの名前。それから、マスで終わるのもあります。プリマスですが、MOUTH と書きますが、そのままの、発音は、マウスですけれども、地名の中ではマスと発音しますね。そしてこれは川の入り口、口、つまり河口という意味がありますね。それから最後はトンで終わるような場合には、これはタウンというところから、来たものだと思われますが、一方アメリカにはニューのつく地名がたくさんありますね。ニューヨークというのが一番そのいい例ですけれども、それから同じような名前でもアメリカとイギリスでは発音が違います。例えば、Birmingham、アラバマにあります Birmingham は H を発音しますね。ところがイギリスの Birmingham、これは発音をしません。そういうところもお気をつけください。Well, I'm sorry to say everyone, but that's all the time we have today, and I certainly hope you enjoyed being with us, and be sure to join us again. Till then, bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye, everyone.
担当は東後勝明先生。お相手はスー・ワンウィグさんとマイケル・バークレーさんでした。英語会話を終わります。